In this video, I'll show you how to make a pivot table with data from a spreadsheet in Google Sheets. First of all, you need to have a spreadsheet open and then click on any cell sort of in the middle of the spreadsheet where you want to use this data to create your pivot table. A pivot table just organizes columns of data that's pretty unwieldy to work with into a nice little table with rows and columns and totals, and it's easier to take in the data as a table instead of a big giant spreadsheet. So I've clicked on a cell, and then I want to click on Data up at the top, and then go down to the middle and select Pivot Table. Now, I've already been working with some pivot tables, so I've created a sheet, and I want to add a pivot table onto my sheet. If you're starting fresh, you could easily just click the button New Sheet and create, and you're good to go. I am going to click Existing Sheet and then select the cell. So I could just go to my sheet, click the spot, push OK. Up here at the data range, notice that it is showing me all of my data, starting in cell A1 going all the way to AI 127, so the whole sheet. Click Create. All right, here we are. So nothing has really been created right now except for some gray rows and columns, and then the values will go in the middle. So we need to go over to the pivot table editor. It's over here on the left-hand side. This is where you get to decide what you want your rows and columns to be. So by rows, it means that the rows labeled over here are going to be what values. So if I go to my Add button next to rows, what are the categories that I want to see listed on each row? I might be interested in looking at if someone ate breakfast this morning. So I will click on, did you eat breakfast this morning? Okay, then the columns, I might want to know, is someone colorblind or not? So I'll click on the category, it's actually the label in row A. So, or not row A, row 1, back in my data set. Click on, am I colorblind? Okay, so that's done some more. I see, did you eat breakfast this morning? The options were yes or no. Are you colorblind? Yes or no, but there's still no data into the table. We need to do one more thing, and that's to fill in the values. Click on Add, and then I experimented with this, and you can either select, are you colorblind? Or select, did you eat breakfast? And either way, you're going to get the same answer. So I'll click on, did you eat breakfast this morning? And down in the box, I want to do the summarize by count A. So that's just, it's going to count up how many people fit into that category, and then leave this as default for just a moment. So when I look back over to my pivot table, notice that it is now filled in the counts here with grand totals as well as joint counts. I can see that of the people who are not colorblind and also didn't eat breakfast, there are 51 of them. There is one person who is colorblind and did not eat breakfast. There are 5 people who are colorblind and did eat breakfast. So I can tell this because I'm looking at the yes column for colorblind. So that means the people here that I've highlighted are colorblind. And then when I look at this row right here, did you eat breakfast? The answer was yes. And so there's 69 people who said yes, and they are not colorblind. And then there's 5 people who did say yes to breakfast, and they are also colorblind. So I realize those categories are kind of confusing. You have to be really careful about what it is you're saying yes and no to. And then the column and row totals are listed over there on the side. And then we also have a grand total. So notice that 52 and 74 add to 126, but so does 120 plus 6, because it's just like we've taken the people in the survey and then categorized them two different ways. How did you eat breakfast? Yes or no. Are you colorblind? Yes or no. No matter what category we push people into, we're still going to have 126 people. We didn't lose anybody by categorizing them. So what I did up here in these other two pivot tables is you can see how I did the work by clicking on somewhere in the cell in the middle of the table and then looking back over to my values. So I first made the table by saying that my values are, did you eat breakfast? I got an answer. And then I thought, well, is it actually true? Did I do this right? So I actually went back to the data set and I counted up and I looked, are there really 5 people who are colorblind and ate breakfast? And when I go back over to my sheet, so colorblind and breakfast, let's see, are you colorblind? Is it all sorted? Yes. So 5 people are colorblind, and those 5 people also said yes, that they had breakfast. And then I could scroll back through here. Let's see, there's 1 person who's colorblind, and they said no to eating breakfast. So back over at my pivot tables, I can find the 5 and the 1. So here are the 6 people who are colorblind. 5 said they had breakfast, 1 said they didn't. So I do believe that the Google Sheets did set up the table correctly. So comparing the first and the second table, when I clicked in the middle, did you eat breakfast was how I determined the values. When I go over here to the second pivot table, I used, are you colorblind, to determine the values. Now notice that those are the rows and columns. Yeah. So either way, no matter which variable I picked, it's still going to fill in the table with those correct counts. So I don't need to worry about a third variable. You just pick one of the rows or the columns and then it'll fill in the data correctly. And then this third example, that's the one that I did for you live, and see how it matches the other stuff. All right, so now the fun stuff. These are all counts. That's well and good, but sometimes you want to know more. So this values box over here on the right, that's the interesting stuff. No, notice I told you to keep the show as to default. Well, I can change that and I get a different story with each option. So I'm going to start with percent of grand total because that's the easiest. If I look at my table, there's 1 person who said yes to being colorblind and no to eating breakfast. So that's 1 out of 126 people. If I click on percent of grand total, it's going to actually calculate that percent for me. So 1 out of 126 is 0.79%. And I can even do that for you. 1 divided by 126. See how you get an answer of 0.0079? Well, that is 0.79%, when you write it as a decimal. And then each of these other categories also had their percentages computed. So these 4 that I'm going to highlight for you, it's found by taking 51, 69, 1, and 5, and then dividing it by 126. That's why you have 100% down on the corner, because we've accounted for everybody. Then you can look at the row and column totals. Here are the row totals. The yes-no breakfast split is 41% about said no to breakfast, and almost 59% said yes to breakfast. And then if I look at the other category, it looks like about a 95 and 5% split. So 95% of people were not colorblind and about 5% were colorblind. All right, now let's do this one more time. Actually, we'll do it 2 more times. We're going to change that percent to show percent of row. So what that means is my rows are going to have 100%. So it's like I have focused only on each row at a time. So back here at the counts, we had 52 people who didn't eat breakfast, and they were split at a 51-1 ratio. Well, that as a percent means 98 to about 2%, approximately. So I can say, of the people who didn't have breakfast, about 2% are colorblind. Of the people who didn't have breakfast, about 98% are not colorblind. And then I can say similar things about the yeses as well. So of the people who are eating breakfast, about 7% are colorblind and about 93% are not colorblind. So you have to think about what your columns are and your rows are so that you say these correctly. I even doubted myself. Hopefully I said that right at the first example correctly. So I say, of the people that I've highlighted, here's the percent that fall into the no's, here's the percent that fall into the yeses. I can easily change that of by changing the default or the show as, change that to percent of column. So it does the math for me. So now I'm saying, okay, I'm only looking at colorblind people. And I know this because the total is at 100%. So I'm only focusing on colorblind people. So of the colorblind people, about 17% don't eat breakfast, and then about 83% do eat breakfast. So the interesting part of these tables is that you can start comparing and say, well, if you're colorblind or not, does that change if you eat breakfast or not? So I might say, well, if you're colorblind, there's a pretty high chance that you're going to have breakfast, about 83%. But then if you're not colorblind, it goes down to about a 50-50, roughly, chance of having breakfast or not. So it's kind of like, if you're colorblind, maybe you're better at eating breakfast than people who aren't colorblind. That might be a stretch. We might need to do an experiment on that, but at least it's insightful to compare one category against the other. So this has been our little intro into pivot tables. It's an easy way to summarize your data, and it's especially useful if you want to, in another step, make a video about bar charts and comparing, because we have a nice division of percentages from categories, but the next step would be to graph this, not just look at a table.